Good morning, how y'all doing? All right, I feel more comfortable now. First of all, could each of my esteemed panelists give a brief introduction and your name?
Rocki Rockingham, Chief Human Resources Officer at GE Appliances.
Stephen Kowalski with the Learning Evolution Group at Roche Pharmaceuticals, Genentech in the US.
Abby Partee, Head of Certified Learning and Development for DHL Supply Chain for the Globe.
Carlos Pardo, I lead technical scaling for Microsoft Americas.
Amazing, everyone. So, as a starter question, could each of you all...
I can introduce myself.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just tucked here in the corner.
Nah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Shaw. I'm the Head of Talent Strategy and Transformation at Eightfold. Eightfold is a skills AI company, just to give you that background, in case you haven't heard of us. Yeah.
So I owe it to you now for us to go opposite order and you start off. Could you each share one tip for productivity? What is one key that has worked for each of you all in terms of managing productivity?
Start with me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the tip for me in managing productivity is to have the passion, I think, behind your work, right? To kind of find the work that you really are engaged in and create that environment for your employees too, to find the work that really empowers them and drives them. I think that's been the key for me, for my history of work.
I like to keep it simple, so I'm a big fan of to-do lists. I have a huge to-do list of everything that I need to accomplish, and then I break that down into what success look like today. Right? What of that bigger to-do list, what are the 2, 3, 4 things that I need to complete today? And that's when I consider the day complete.
I'm going to steal what she said a little bit. I think a big part is starting with why. So why are you getting up and going to work, and what impact do you and your team have on others? I think that is what keeps me motivated and productive every day.
Great. I worked with a leadership coach some years ago, and she asked me to do an exercise, and that was imagine that someone you hold in high esteem is behind you, and they're just slightly pushing on your back when you ask for a promotion or have to have a difficult conversation. So in my office, I've got Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, and Albert Einstein, giant posters behind me, and I just imagine they're pushing me slightly right there in the center of my back.
I love that.
Yeah, right?
I would say keep it fun. If you can't laugh at yourself every day, if you can't smile, if you can't keep humor in it, it just keeps everything interesting, it keeps it lighthearted, and it keeps people interested. So I think have fun.
I think we should all have fun at work, right? Carlos, focusing on you for a second, learning is a celebrated part of Microsoft's culture and growth mindset. And your curiosity, these things are all core aspects of your organization's values and your goal system. Can you share a bit about the company's approach to learning and some of the work you are leading to drive positive impacts and outcomes as an executive?
Yeah, I'll try. So about 10 years ago, Satya took over as CEO for Microsoft, right? And that created a big shift towards the adoption and embracing a growth mindset as a catalyst of the culture at Microsoft. We look for everybody to be a learn-it-all versus a know-it-all. And that has shifted significantly our day-to-days. A couple of examples of how we've made that real at Microsoft is we have learning days. So for example, in the Americas, twice a month, you have a full day dedicated, protected to learning. That can mean something completely different to one person than to another. But we protect the time, we give guidance, and then we ask managers to say, this is what I'm going to learn about. For example, this Friday is one. So I tell my team, this is what I'm going to learn about. This is how I'm using that time. How are you going to use the time? Right? So we encourage and allow people to learn during the job. It doesn't need to be at night, it doesn't need to be on the weekends. And then when we think of our performance management mechanisms, we embedded as well the learning component. So right now we're in the process of what we call their connects. And during that conversation, we look back and say, what's a challenge that you can reflect on? What could you have done differently for greater impact? And most importantly, what did you learn? What did you learn and how are you going to apply that? So we've integrated the learning component into our day-to-day conversations, into our performance management mechanisms, and created an environment where it's okay to learn, it's okay to fail fast, learn, and adapt.
Thank you so much for sharing that insight, Carlos. Rocki, GE Appliances is recognized as one of the fastest growing appliance manufacturers in the US, and the company has an established commitment to innovation, diversity, and inclusion. Can you talk a bit about the company's quote-unquote zero distance philosophy and how it impacts consumers and informs employee values that encourage continuous growth and high levels of performance leading to greater productivity?
Yeah, we have a philosophy that we follow called zero distance, where we try to create products and solutions directly for our consumers. We want to eliminate the space between how we create and what consumers want. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that as we narrow that gap, we are providing with, diverse innovations and ideas what consumers are requesting from us. And so instead of trying to just anticipate and guess what people want next, we're asking them directly. And then we create and ideate based on that. We found that, since we've started with the zero distance philosophy, we've been able to create innovations that are solving problems and creating solutions that consumers want and need in their homes.
For sure. Stephen, how can leaders spark creativity and innovation in the workforce that lends itself to sustainable levels of workplace productivity? Because you made a really good choice in terms of putting these seminal figures behind you.
Yeah.
And that was your creativity. So what does it look like in your workplace?
Yeah, maybe first, if I could just go back for 1 second to what Carlos was talking about. I think when we think about the growth mindset, it's really important to think about the other side of it. And sometimes we forget the other side is called a proving orientation. And so we love to talk about the growth mindset, growth orientation. The alternative, which is very much alive in our organizations, is a proving orientation. We see that in performance management. We see that in groups. Often learning and development groups are focused on proving their value. So I just want to point that out, the contrast. In order to see the growth mindset in the light we want to see it in, I think we sometimes have to remember there's this other thing that's operating in our organizations called proving. Now to innovation and creativity. So maybe first I'll bust a myth and then offer some suggestions. Most people think that creativity is about coming up with possibilities. It's actually not just that. It's at the intersection of possibility, constraint, and purpose. So we need a purpose that brings our creativity forward. Then we invent possibilities or come up with ideas and possibilities in relationship to the constraints that exist. We're always looking out for viability, feasibility, and desirability, right? Those are some of the constraints that we might operate in. So it's not just about coming up with ideas. It's dancing in this intersection. So leaders, what can leaders do? First of all, the most important thing is to craft a purpose that's both meaningful and durable, and that has some tension in it. Like a great example from one of our departments was lower the cost of the delivery of our services while increasing customer satisfaction with those services. Right? You would think that those two things are at odds with each other. Actually, that they use this as this purpose as the criteria to evaluate ideas that were coming forward and how to invest in those ideas. So the leaders play an incredibly important role in crafting that purpose that has some kind of tension in it that really gets our juices going. And then also leaders can sometimes be too overly focused on the constraints. It's so important. Like one of the first things I did when I was innovating in HR was I would always go to the legal department. I would go to the legal department first because I wanted to know all the reasons why I couldn't do what I wanted to do. So like helping us, catalyzing people's potential is really about helping them see the constraints but not be stopped by them.
And I thought that was really important in the sense of, just understanding the territory, if you will. Like instead of like making things ambiguous and really large and harder to solve, it's like, okay, hey, let's just focus in more.
Yes.
So I think that was really important. Andrea, You lead talent strategy and transformation at Eightfold, a skills AI company. Previously, you mentioned that from a learning and development and employee engagement perspective, AI can provide transparency and empowerment. Can you share more context about what this means in regards to skills matching, career mapping, and learning direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So 20-second context on what skills intelligence is. So basically, the way skills intelligence works is you have incredibly deep data on individuals and the skills they have as they move through different roles. And therefore, what AI does when you have skills AI is you're able to understand the skills your employees have or your candidates have if you're in recruiting. You're able to match that to different roles you have across the company. So that's the fundamental is being able to match. And that unlocks everything, right? That unlocks kind of those two, kind of the environment it creates for employee engagement is really around transparency and also empowerment. So I'm going to describe that really quickly. And those are two elements that really drive employee engagement and the employee experience, which I think is the center of everything. Actually, prior to coming to Eightfold, I worked in American Express, and I was heading up the Platinum Centurion card, which are like the crown jewels at Amex. And I was asked to bring the customer experience to employees. And so I joined HR. And I led a transformation, which was Eightfold. So what happens when you can bring that matching and why you create such a great employee experience is, number one, the transparency, the ability for employees to understand what roles across the entire company they match to. What skills do what roles do your skills match to? When you give that transparency, all of a sudden your employees understand like where they can go. Right, and that's really powerful. Instead of having to know somebody or being limited to understanding roles in your own organization, you actually can see then across the organization. That's quite powerful. So that increases a lot. Obviously, diversity really rises when you've given that transparency to all employees. It's no longer who you know, it's what you know. Quite powerful from the standpoint of transparency. And then the empowerment. Like if you allow your employees to see that, they're empowered to drive their career in whatever direction they want to go. So all of a sudden, it's no longer HR saying like, hey, if you're in this role, you might want to move to these type of roles. You actually can see across the organization, you'd be amazed the different types of opportunities that are out there for you. And so I think that transparency is where, and the empowerment is where you get employees to get very engaged, right? Because they care about what career path they want to take, and their learning gets super engaged because their learning is moving them in the direction that they want to move in their career. So I'd say those are kind of really powerful things that AI enables, and keep that in mind. You want to give them both the transparency and then therefore the empowerment to really drive their careers.
And I really appreciate this emphasis on transparency because you guys are focused on empowering the human beings at the center of this. So ironically enough, as we're talking about AI, people often think that robots are going to take over the world. That hasn't happened yet, thank God. But, empowering, I think, the people at your company is super important. So I think that's awesome. Abby, I want to focus on DEI and inclusion for a second here, talking to you. When it comes to authenticity, inclusion, and having a sense of belonging in the workplace, these are keys for employees. How can leaders connect the dots between productivity and authenticity to create environments where employees can learn and thrive?
Yeah, great question. So we are a supply chain company, and productivity is, our second name sometimes. But first and foremost, we're a people-based organization. So we have about 190,000 employees worldwide. And we're not a big asset-heavy company, so our business is people, and we have to rely on our team members to get the work done. We've done training in DEI, and we have talked a lot about, we have a statement, we have a big push there, but really what it comes down to is the individual leaders understanding the importance and treating each of our people as humans. So one thing I wanted to talk about today too, and I might be cutting into one of your questions, is we have a supervisory academy. So for those 190,000 people, most of those people are in a warehouse setting, and we have about 10,000 frontline leaders or supervisors that touch or influence the majority of the members of our company. And so we put them through a 15 to 18 month supervisory academy where we dig into not just operational and what they need to do day to day, but leadership and what that means and how to lead a diverse group of people. I think now we have 6 or 7 generations in the workforce. We've got, such a diverse group that are in our workforce today that it's really important that the people who lead the majority of our population know how to be good leaders, know how to be inclusive, and productivity is great, but that human side is absolutely first.
Yeah, please do, Carlos.
I actually want to recognize Abby and DHL Supply, right? As I go and speak with customers, there's many companies that don't have a learning culture, right? And how are you going to create leaders, right? How are you going to help people grow if you don't allow them to train, to learn, to grow, to define a path forward? And it might sound like, well, how do they not have one? And you'll be surprised. It happens many, many times. At Microsoft, it's part of the benefits once they make a purchase from us to go and help the upskilling of their workforce. And many times we encounter challenges on, well, it's great, but my team just doesn't have the time to go through that. How are you going to maximize the potential of the investment that you just made if you don't make the time to really train your workforce, prepare your leaders for what's next? So kudos.
Thank you.
Can I
please
build on the
jump
bill?
in.
Because I think this is so
Please
great.
do.
Because the importance of the learning, especially in this current environment, is so high. Because if you look at even from a skills and a leadership perspective, things are changing really quickly right in front of your eyes, right? We saw with ChatGPT, all of a sudden was on the scene. It's happening quickly across every industry, right? All the digital skills across every functional area. You've got growth in biotech and pharma. You've got growth in 5G and telecom, like all these, and renewable energy and oil and gas. Like every industry has dramatic changes happening, and so the ability to learn for your workforce is really critical, because they need to be ready for the future. These trends are on us, and you want your workforce. I mean, it's a win-win, right? It's for your people, your leaders, and also your company, right, to grow the critical skills and have that learning happening.
May I add also, and you said it a bit. This is the first time we've had 5 generations of people in our workforce, and so the dynamics that has created for us are that, the kids that we raised are now working for us, and they were raised very differently. And so their expectations are different. What they're looking for is different. And so what happens is our frontline managers now need to be retrained and think differently about how they have workers who are Gen Zers or who are millennials who want to work differently and who need different things and who have different expectations. So, what you have to do is when you create a learning environment, it has to be an environment where people learn the way they need to learn, and then they're able to then communicate that in a way that people can receive it. So generational dynamics are really impactful today within our organizations and have made a shift.
I think this is really interesting because one of my favorite memes I've seen in the last, 5 years now involves somebody saying, yeah, I go to work every day and my best friend is like 60 years older than I am. And it's so relatable because I think that's the joy of having 5 generations at work, right? 7 generations. And it's up to all of us now to unpack that and to maximize this. So moving ahead, and you jumped ahead, Abby, and I love that because listen, we're all on the same page. Across generations, employees have specific expectations around career development. In particular, many companies are finding that early career employees are seeking out opportunities to drive career development from the get-go. What can companies do to better address this and support employees in taking initiative to drive their career development experience?
So I just wanted to, I can talk about this and hop on what Andrea said too. So not that a system solves everything, but we have a system right now called Career Marketplace. Mm-hmm. And it's a very user-friendly experience where people can put in their skills, they can have full transparency of roles, and it's a really big chance to open up those lines of communication. If I can see roles over in other countries, other states and whatnot, But what we're trying to do is really put, like Andrea said, put the power in the people's hands. So make sure that it's very clear, transparent, what skills are needed for which role, how can they go on to the system and see what's available and see what they could add value to, and really open up that learner or employee-centric drive of career development. We also have extensive talent panels, employee development reviews, where we spend a lot of time each year talking about people, talking about their careers, how can we help them, how can we sponsor them, to make sure that they can have a nice, successful space in DHL.
Yeah, I could build on that too. 2009, we launched an employee career center, of course, with a pharmaceutical company. We called it the Career Lab. And this is a place that's founded on two core principles. One is career development is actually part of your job, so you don't have to sneak there during lunch or after work or before work. It's part of your job. And then the Career Lab is not a place that's focused on outplacement. It's really about positive internal development. We had someone say, the job I wanted was in the next building, the building right next door, but I didn't know it was there. And so we have career consultants who actually meet their external consultants who meet with employees. We recommend maybe 5 sessions at any particular phase of your career. And then we've organized a lot of our learning and development resources around the career framework that we're using there. So it's a great resource. It's lasted through all of the different transformations and permutations of HR since 2009. So I think it's a personalized touch to augment, I think, what we're talking about here with some of the more advanced tech solutions to career development.
Okay.
Yeah, please do.
I'm a huge fan of career development, so thank you for everything that you're doing. Something that we're doing at Microsoft now is called Career Jams, networking jams. So basically enable an opportunity for people to volunteer, to be mentors for others, and then people that sign up to speak to a mentor. And then you have you identify who has volunteered, what time slots they have made available for those conversations, and then people just reach out, and the system puts sources and uses together. And in the last couple of weeks, I've had about 10 of these conversations as a mentor, and people are just genuinely curious about how did you do it? What would you recommend? What has worked? What hasn't worked? So also enabling these types of conversations during the day. I think it's encouraging to learn from others about how they did it and how they can apply it themselves as well.
And I think that's a great add. So in addition to, for learning purposes, in addition to taking courses, I think mentorship is really critical, right? That's the real world connection to what's needed in this role, and is this something I want to do in the future? I'd add one other element, which is projects. If you give employees opportunities to sign up for projects that they can fit into their work week, that's another really powerful way to enable your employees to learn. So I think those are all in addition to just coursework.
Yeah, for sure. And I really appreciate this emphasis on meeting people where they are, right? Because there's a lot of trepidation oftentimes when new employees join a workplace. Oh man, hey, I don't want to ask many questions. I don't want to bug people. And you guys are saying, nah, bug me, please. So I think it's really awesome. I want to pause for a second and just have everyone in the room put up a hand if this applies. How many millennials are in the room? Please, you can just put your hand up. Wow, okay. How many Gen X? Cool, wow. All right, and how many boomers or baby boomers? Okay, so we got a couple. All right, and the reason I just asked that was because everything that we're hearing on the panel directly applies. All of us are working in different spaces across generations. So I think it's really awesome that we can all evaluate how we can better communicate with one another. So I thought that was really cool.
Can I share one more?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I told you I'm passionate about
Go ahead.
And I'm going to share this story so that hopefully it breaks down the barrier of what you said earlier, of reaching out to somebody, right? So I joined Microsoft 20 years ago as an intern. Intern in sales, doing reporting, but I wanted to be in finance. And I just asked around. I said, who's the CFO in this building? Who is it? And his name was Roberto Palmaca, close friend of mine to this day. And I just said, would you have coffee with me? Would you tell me how finance works? I'd love to learn, and I'd love to work for you one day. Coffee number 2, coffee number 3, opportunity comes up. He reaches out. If I had never asked for that coffee chat, he would never know I existed, or 2, that I was interested to work in finance. So don't be afraid, reach out. Most people will say yes to those type of conversations. And if they say no, ask someone else or come back and ask again.
For sure. And Carlos, you kind of jumped into things, and I appreciate that. For all of you on the panel, and you feel free to jump in if you like, what is the role and impact of coaching and mentoring in helping people advance, and how have those evolved in recent years in the workplace?
So I also want to add something onto here, which is a sponsor. So I think coaching is more of, I think, situational and maybe more of asking questions. Mentoring is you see somebody like Carlos and you're like, Carlos, tell me about your career and I want to learn from you and I look up to you. But a sponsor is somebody that talks good about you when you're not in the room. So I think even more from a career development perspective and a learning perspective is how do you find some of those sponsors that when they're having these important conversations of who can take that role or who's ready for that, how do you make sure that you come up as, Carlos, that's the person that I want to tap on the shoulder. That's somebody who we believe in, we want to invest in. So I know I give a little bit about coaching and mentoring, but I think a sponsor is just as important in organizations. And that's something we're doing right now, especially for our underrepresented groups right now, is finding sponsors in the business to seek people out to sponsor their careers and look out for them in these behind doors conversations.
I think one thing that fuels this is a spirit of generosity. So maybe I'll ask each one to think about, like, when you think about your team or your department or your company, would you say there's a spirit of generosity there? I remember being in a leadership team and I was facilitating, and they went around and said kind of one takeaway from the day, like we usually do. And then someone said, hey, what's yours? Because sometimes we forget the facilitator. And I said, you know what? My takeaway, my action is to generously support other people's priorities. And they were like, what the heck are you talking about? It was such a foreign concept. So I think to be a sponsor, to be a mentor, to be a coach, right? It really means, in an organizational context, being generous with your time, with your wisdom, with your intuition, with your social capital.
And to expand on that, when you're talking about, because you may be thinking, well, how do I find a sponsor? How do I find a mentor? What does that look like? Is that formalized? One of the approaches that we've taken is we have employee resource groups. We have 8 of them actually across our business. And we've tried to be more intentional about putting groups together and allowing them to ask questions and to seek out mentors and to bring the resources to them so that they have exposure to those resources, and then they're empowered to then follow up after that. So, I encourage you to involve yourselves with different groups across your organization, because what it does is it provides exposure on a different level so that you see people and that people see you.
I have a question. You can probably guess my answer. What's changing mentorship into the future is the technology, is obviously my perspective, because technology enables all of this in a formal way for your organization and allows you to make this happen at scale. Meaning, you're providing your employees with an ability, as I talked about earlier, to figure out what kind of pathways they can take and what type of learning will help them. I think mentors can be found based on kind of skills that you're looking for that other people in the organizations have, that you can seek out to be a mentor, and they can raise their hand and say, I'm open to be a mentor. So you're opening it up much more. And then from a project's perspective too, same thing, the ability to match the skills that you have with skills that are looked for in a project, but also ability to grow certain skills are really powerful, and that's what I think is changing. It's now more, available at scale and with kind of an overall infrastructure to support your employees. And that's kind of what's going to make a big difference, I think, in the future.
And I thought Go ahead,
I
Carl.
promise I'll stop.
No, man, it's your world. It's your world. Go ahead, man.
It's a passionate topic, right? And I want to bring everything that's been said and package it up into a concept of having your personal board of directors. You need mentors, you need coaches, you need sponsors. You need to nurture them, you need to recruit for them. You need to validate them. From the sponsor perspective, you need to have the conversation of, Abby, I want you to be my sponsor. Will you be my sponsor? And they could say yes, they could say no. But don't assume that somebody is your sponsor if you haven't validated that with the person. Right? I see that happening all of the time. Hey, my sponsor is such and such. Have you asked them? Right? They had an opportunity on their team. Have you validated? And when they've confronted, they said, well, you're still missing X, Y, and Z. So you need to have that uncomfortable conversation of saying, will you be my sponsor? And will you vouch for me when I'm not in the room?
You talked about, and in this administration, DEI and woke has become a bad word. The Economic Development Council, they're trying to move away from the terminology discrimination and sectorizing to DEI. And with this new administration, how do you intend to keep the good-minded spirit of DEI in the workforce without making it sound like a bad word?
So I'll speak to that because we have a role in our North American business. The question was about DEI and the current administration and maybe becoming a bad word, or it's already been a bad word. So we have a role in our North American business that they just opened up called Culture and Inclusion. And it has lots of DEI undertones and it's there. But I think what we're trying to get to is we're looking at overall culture and a lot of policies or systems that you can change within your culture support and help maybe not just one underrepresented groups, but multiple. There's lots of intersectionalities. So just from some limited research I've done, I think corporations might be going away from the terminology, but they're not going away from the spirit and the purpose of, we participate in the Great Place to Work survey every year, and we care about that a lot. We want, because we, survey all of our associates, and we want them to feel that this is a place of fairness and they belong and it's impartial, and that's really where we will hit upon a lot of those DEI initiatives, but maybe communicating or looking at it in a different way. So I don't think it's going to go away, maybe the terminology, but not the core purpose and the why behind it.
And I just want to add something to answer your question. So in the state of Florida, how do I say this politely? Things have been very unique, if you will. And so, for example, when it comes to Stop Woke and that kind of legislation, there was actually a court battle that people should research that happened this past March, which basically the Stop Woke protocol and legislation was declared unconstitutional. So on a national level, on a federal level rather. And the issue is what we're seeing is a lot of businesses don't realize this because there's a lot of misinformation that is happening around that act. So I believe businesses should be empowered to at least do the research in terms of what really is legally reprehensible, because a lot of things that Governor DeSantis says ordains are not holding up on a federal level. Now, to your point, hopefully this doesn't happen, but that can change come January. But for now, there is a lot of misinformation around there, and businesses in the state of Florida should feel empowered to some level. It's just about accessing that information.
You're a Republican town, so.
It's interesting, right? It's definitely interesting. But that being said, I wanted to take a second before we get out of here real quick to talk about the importance of ERGs, or employee resource groups. How many people in this room are members of an employee resource group? Okay, I like those numbers. All right, I like that. Can you guys talk about, go ahead, Rocki.
That's not enough hands.
Ooh.
Okay. What I encourage is everybody should be, I think you should join them all, but everybody should be a part of at least one. Because at the end of the day, what it does is, and let's go back to your point of diversity. It's not a checkbox exercise. It is an exercise of culture. And so when we talk about diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, people coming from different places, guess what? That's what our organizations are made up of. And so when you talk about staying the course, which we do, we're committed. It's not something that we turn on and turn off, but it's about how do we encourage employees to learn more about each other and understand how important that is to innovating and ideating for the business. And so as we do that, that's why I encourage everybody, join a group that doesn't look like you. Join a group that doesn't think the way you think. Because at the end of the day, what you'll learn and understand is that there's power in diversity, and there's power in us thinking differently and being differently. We become more creative, and we become more of a cohesive organization.
I might just say, if your leadership is asking for innovation, the one thing they may not realize is that we need human creativity to fuel that innovation. Innovation doesn't happen without creativity, right? And creativity doesn't happen without diversity of perspectives and thoughts and experiences, right? So our creativity is actually a potential. It's not an ability. It's a potential to invent solutions to the challenges we face. And so what's unique is what I bring to it. It's not unique that I'm creative. There aren't some people who are more creative than others, right? But what my life experience, and this gets to the individuality side of the topic of the panel, right? What my experience is, that's what makes me unique with my creativity and makes my contribution really important. And so you can tie this directly to innovation. You can tie it to the metrics that are associated with innovation, and that diversity is fueling all of that.
For sure. Well, everybody, I would like to give a huge round of applause to our esteemed panelists. And in addition to that, we really appreciate y'all engagement today. Y'all could have been doing anything else. Y'all could have been scrolling your phones while we talk. And we really appreciate your engagement. So thank you all. So give a round of applause for yourselves.